Hey everyone, we're going to talk about something called the Beat Generation today. So, we've been talking about the 50s, how everyone was moving to the suburbs, how they were having more kids with the baby boom, how they were buying all these new inventions and expressing themselves with cars, all these different things. And now we're going to see a rejection of the 1950s. And these people were called the Beat Generation, otherwise known as the Beatniks. So, this movement really comes out of three main poets, writers, authors, and here we have Jack Kerouac, we have Allen Ginsberg, and we have William Burroughs. All of these guys are going to reject the conformity of the 1950s. When you conform to something, if you have conformity, you're trying to be like everyone else. You're following the rules of what society is supposed to be. If you conform to something, you're being more like it. So, how is everyone conforming to the 1950s? What are people doing on a large scale in the 1950s? Well, so many people are moving to the suburbs. That's a common thing. People are conforming and following each other's example and leaving the cities and going to the suburbs on the outskirts of the cities. That is a conformist idea that's taking place. They're having a lot of kids with the baby boom. A lot of people are doing that. That's not an individual thing. That's what society is kind of doing as a whole. There's lots of materialism in the 50s going on. People are buying all sorts of new consumer goods. We showed you radios, refrigerators, washing machines, vacuum cleaners, cars, new types of cars. And this consumer culture is this belief that buying goods will make us happy. And we saw this rejection of this materialism and this consumer culture in the 1920s as well, as people were buying lots of stuff during that period as well. And the Lost Generation was another group of authors that was going to reject that. So we see a little bit of repeating history here, except for this time it's after World War II instead of World War I. And another conformist idea is that women, kind of on a large scale, are going back to the homes. They're leaving the workplace. They're now taking care of the kids, taking care of their families, their home. They're cleaning it. They're cooking dinner and meals for the kids. And they're being housewives on a large scale for the most part. So the Beat Generation, or the Beatniks, Kerouac, Ginsberg, and Burroughs, right there, are going to be what we call non-conformists. In other words, they just reject conformity. They're not trying to be like everyone else. They're not trying to follow the rules of what society is supposed to be, or what the main lines are moving towards in terms of society. So they're trying to be different, and they're trying to experiment and live life to the fullest on their terms, not what society wants for them. Here's kind of a look for the Beatniks in the 1950s. So think about a word that would represent this. To me, if I saw this for the first time and didn't know who these people were, I would think they were hippies. Well, they were really the hippies before the hippies. This is kind of where hippies are going to come from. These are the hippies of the 1950s, in other words. We just call them Beatniks. So these people, these authors, writers up here, are going to experiment with more nonconformist ideas, things that most people wouldn't accept in the 1950s, and what people weren't really participating in doing in the 50s on a large scale. Experimenting with different types of drugs, with their own sexuality, with their spirituality, with religion and other spiritual beliefs. Buddhism was a big one of those. Anti-materialism beliefs, which again is rejecting that American idea that consumer goods make people happy. So all these ideas we just said, and there's many more as well, are out of the mainstream of the 1950s culture. They're rejecting the moving to the suburbs, the buying the goods, the having lots of kids, leaving the cities. Women, leave your jobs that you had during World War II and go be a housewife. Rejecting those things and experimenting and trying to figure out what is the best way we can live life to the fullest and be our own individuals. So what they're going to end up doing, because ultimately the Beat Generation is a literary movement, it's a movement of literature, they are going to write down a lot about nonconformity and these nonconformist ideas, drugs, sexuality, spirituality, anti-materialism, so on, in different books and poems, and write lots of poetry. Jack over here is going to have lots of poems that are very famous. So ultimately, this movement is called the Beat Generation. These beatniks are going to pave the way for the hippies in the next decade, in the 60s and the 70s, and are going to really incorporate a lot of these elements into it and keep these nonconformist ideas, this rejection of what society tells them to do. So there's two stories of the 50s. There's all the things that people are doing, those conformist ideas, and then the rejection of it with the Beat Generation, and in a way, rock and roll music, which was a reaction as well. To a lot of the moral ideas we saw in the 1950s. Hope you learned something today, guys. Thanks.
Well, I'm afraid young Ned is unusually aggressive, but I can't seem to find a cause for it. Hey, get down from that bookshelf, please. Most of those books haven't been discredited yet. Would you please tell your son to stop?
We can't do it, man. That's discipline. That's like telling Gene Krupa not to go boom, boom, ba, 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 boom, boom, ba, 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 boom, 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 ba, 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 boom, boom.
Lack of discipline. I'm beginning to see the problem.
We don't believe in rules. Like, we gave them up when we started living like freaky beatniks.
Now, you don't believe in rules, yet you want to control Ned's anger.
Yeah, you've got to help us, Doc. We've tried nothing and we're all out of ideas.